In most games, defense is just as important as the offense, as it adds more variety and suspense than if every play was just a sweep. However, if the defense is too strong, the game can stall out and lead to less exciting matches. But in a game like Pokemon, there's a defensive mechanic that's strong enough to break the game. The scariest thing is, this mechanic is a staple when it comes to video games. You can call me Nordist, and I'm over here with Stemma, my collection of creatures based off of science topics where I've been trying to develop a game with these guys. Now, I still have a long ways to go on my Godot project, so today I'll go over the ways this mechanic exists in Pokemon and discuss how Pokemon tried to temper it over the years. Afterwards, I'll share my approach to this video game staple and share yet another creature design from my set of Zodiac Beasts. So take a rest, because today we'll be talking about health regeneration. Healing is a staple in multiple video game genres, so why would healing be a problem in Pokemon? Well, in Pokemon, a match ends when all of a team's Pokemon has fainted. In other words, the win condition is determined by the lack of health, which means that any form of health restoration could make the game last longer. And again, that's usually a good thing, as we get to see more varied strategies, interesting moves, and possibly see more of the team get to shine. However, if unchecked, the game could last a bit too long, to the point of a theoretically infinite game, effectively ruining it. So let's focus on how healing is done in Pokemon battles, starting with items. The most common form of healing in role-playing games is usually using something like medkits or potions. These potions can be adjusted in their cost and effectiveness to make sure that the casual game is still engaging, as healing during the match often has the inherent risk of giving your opponent an extra opportunity to strike. Additionally, potions are often finite, so even if you keep healing with potions every turn, you'll eventually run out, and the game should eventually end. But in a PvP Pokemon battle, inventory items like these are straight up banned. But Pokemon still provides a move that is very similar to using a health potion, Recover, in all of their variants. Wow, I didn't know there were so many variants of this one move. But basically, instead of using a turn to use a potion, you'll have to use a turn and one of your 4 move slots to heal half of your max HP, with some variants healing up to 2/3 in certain conditions. Now that's a lot of HP, and Pokemon knows. So over the years, they kept on reducing the PPs of these kind of moves. Oh yeah, power points. As we discussed in my last video on immunities, Pokemon has a fairly unique power point system where every move can only be dealt a finite number of times, and running out of all moves would lead to struggles to hurt both sides until the game can finally end. More on that later. So using a move like Recover is very much like using up one of your 8 potions from your inventory. Technically, in a casual gameplay, you can restore power points for free or through other items, but again, we're just focusing on mechanics during the battle today. Other than Recover, there are quite a few other moves that are variants of existing healing items. From moves that heal status conditions, moves that heal the health of another target, and some moves fully restore a Pokemon, but usually at a hefty cost, such as sleeping for 2 turns or straight up sacrificing one of your Pokemon for the other. In the 9th generation, there also exists a move that can revive a party member, but this move is balanced by having a very small distribution and a small power point. Now, while bag items aren't allowed in these PvP battles, giving your Pokemon an item to hold is allowed. Since their implementation in the 2nd generation, berries were supposed to be natural counterparts to the bag items, so that now Pokemon can hold and use them for themselves. While many other berries with various effects have been added later on, let's focus on the ones that directly increase the Pokemon's HP. While the Oran Berry and the Berry Juice increases HP for a set amount of points, which makes it more useful for Pokemon with smaller health pools, and while the Enigma Berry is activated by getting hit super effectively, I've never seen this berry used before. I don't know how it could be reliably used. Most other HP restoring berries recover a fraction of the Pokemon's max HP after the Pokemon has been damaged enough. Now, the exact percentages have also been tweaked over the years, where they initially healed too little, but then they had to be nerfed in terms of when they activated. Alright, so this is kind of like a one-time potion on top of the recovery moves. What's the big deal? Well, berries aren't always single use. They usually are, but some moves can recycle that berry. Okay, but moves are still bound by power points. This shouldn't break the game. So, the gameplay of a Pokemon species is mostly dependent on 4 things: their type, stats, moves, and abilities, where abilities are another set of rules that are applied onto the regular gameplay. There are quite a few abilities that specifically deal with berries, sometimes activating them twice or amplifying their effect, but the ability Harvest has a chance to regenerate the berry after every turn. This regeneration is unlimited, and in fact is guaranteed if someone sets up harsh sunlight. Now, there are also specific moves to stop berry regeneration, and even an ability that specifically blocks berry usage. And while these counters are common and widely distributed, I hope you can see how dangerous healing could be, as it could make a game unendable if it weren't for these counters and the PowerPoint system. Despite their humble beginnings as a situational potion, berries are still often used in competitive matches. Mind you, even when berries are used without Harvest, they are still very strong in the game, and could be annoying to fight against, hence the many different ways to disarm the strategy. However, there are a few more strategies that can recover HP. How can you gain health but still make progress in the battle? In Pokemon, the worst case scenario would be to wait for your opponent to lose all their power points, but depending on what moves they have, that could cost hundreds of turns. Games should end before power points are depleted. But while many of the Pokemon healing moves discussed so far have been status moves, there are some attacking moves that also heal the player. These are called HP draining attacks, which makes the user stick around for longer at the expense of the opponent. Now, what's important to note about these moves is that the heal gained is proportional to the damage dealt, and so far, all of the HP draining attacks heal the user for less than the damage that they dealt. Heck, there's even an item that boosts the healing from these kind of moves, and even then, the highest percent gained is 97.5% of the damage dealt, not 100. So why is that? Even though these moves might sound less problematic than non-damaging heals, what if your opponent also has an HP draining attack? If 100% of the HP is transferred to each other, then we're just passing around the same health endlessly, waiting until one of them struggles finally. But these moves usually come with more power points than regular recovery moves, so it'll take even longer before struggles kick in. But since Pokemon made the regeneration less than 100%, even though these moves do slow down the game, progress can still be made in the battle. In fact, there's another nuance to most of these moves that Pokemon has baked in, where these moves usually deal less damage to the opponent than other non-HP draining attacks, leaving the decision up to you whether you could risk dealing the lower damage to gain health instead, or if you should just deal more damage now to prevent your opponent from responding with another move. Also, just to be thorough, the Shell Bell item allows you to drain an eighth of the health from any direct damage you deal. I rarely see this item used in competitive, but it does seem very cool in a casual playthrough. Then in Pokemon, there are 2 last HP draining moves that are still status moves: Strength Sap and Leech Seed. Strength Sap heals the user by the target's physical attack stat. This means that there should be diminishing returns. Sure, this could be very annoying for a team with only physical attackers, but quite a few physical attackers have access to other moves and abilities to still hurt the Strength Sapper. And if the target is ever a special attacker, the Strength Sapper will still be in danger. And now Leech Seed. If you land some Leech Seeds on a target, at the end of every turn, an eighth of the target's max HP will be passively transferred to the Leech Seeder's position, and unlike other draining moves, the amount of health transferred is 100%. Hold up, wasn't there an issue with transferring the same amount of HP, where if both sides have the same HP draining move that the game wouldn't end? Pokemon actually has an answer to this from the very first generation, where Leech Seeds don't work on grass types. And who has access to Leech Seed? Mostly grass types. so it's rare to see a game where both sides are leech seeded. And even then, there are several ways to avoid or get rid of leech seeds, such as simply switching the Pokemon out. And then there's a Pokemon ability that actually discourages this whole strategy by hurting the trainer instead of healing them. So we got recovers and berries that are balanced by how they're usually limited or could be knocked out. And we have HP draining moves that usually deal more damage than healing itself. But Leech Seed here can lead our conversation into a new category: passive healing. Sometimes Pokemon are rewarded with a little bit of health just because they survived the turn on the battlefield. The amount is usually pretty small, like a 16th of their max HP, and by now, most of the passive healing is temporary, because the move or ability that grants passive health are dependent on a certain condition which doesn't last forever. However, the least limiting passive heal is still widely used, that being the Leftovers item. Who knew an apple core would be so valuable, as the Pokemon holding it will continue to heal until they lose it somehow. Since this item made passive healing so accessible, this might have had a hand in changing how Struggle worked, where Struggle used to deal more damage than it hurt itself, to now, where strugglers lose a quarter of their max HP to quickly knock themselves out. Now the move Knockoff and several other kind of moves can disable items, just like how they could counter berries in the same way, but Leftovers aren't affected by a nerve or berry targeting moves. Interestingly, there's a poison counterpart called Black Sludge, which heals poison types for the same amount, but if they're switched onto a non-poison type, it deals passive damage instead, even at a faster rate. Speaking of poison, there's a poison status condition, which by now deals an eighth of the max health, and there's a badly poisoned condition that deals increasing amounts of damage per turn. While other conditions and effects that deal passive damage only rivals the recovery of Leftovers or are temporary, poison is harder to get rid of, and is supposed to consistently overpower passive healing, especially with the badly poisoned condition, which many Pokemon can inflict to each other. By the way, there's a lot more to talk about poison in of itself, and it probably deserves its own video. However, in a cruel twist of fate, while this damage over time is supposed to combat passive healing, it's often employed by the same passive healers. As there are archetypes in creature designs, there are also archetypes in gameplay. One such competitive Pokemon archetype that often uses Leftovers is called Stall, where they would focus on survival and recovery and count on passive damage or exhausting their opponent's power points and their minds to win the match. It's kind of ironic how passive damage is supposed to counteract and overpower passive healing, but it's perfect for passive healers who just need to throw out some poison and spend the rest of the game protecting and healing. Speaking of how ironic poison is, the poison heal ability actually makes the Pokemon heal when they're poisoned. And that healing rate is better than the Leftovers. I mean, but this should be niche, right? Like, how would you ever reliably poison yourself? Oh, that's real nice. They made an item that reliably poisons you. Poison Heal with the Toxic Orb is very strong, as you can passively heal and avoid any status condition that might try to stop you. That's why only 2 Pokemon families get this. And wow, is it more annoying on Gliscor, who also has 2 immunities. Stall as a whole kinda scares me, as opposing Stall teams have historically made matches that lasted well over 1,000 turns and drew out frustration on both sides while draining any excitement about the match. It's why many fans in the competitive singles community have implemented basically a 1,000 turn cap to every game, because Stall teams could make games last nearly forever. Defense can make games interesting and varied, but too much defense can effectively stop the game. But as we've seen so far, with all of these healing strategies, Pokemon has always tried to provide a counter to them. And Pokemon has tried to block healing as a whole with Heal Block. But since this status move was only useful against these kind of Pokemon, and feels rather situational, the latest generation has introduced Psychic Noise, which applies the Heal Block effect on top of dealing psychic damage. Pretty darn smart, frankly. By now, I've laid out most of the elements behind these infamous Stall team matchups. But wait a second, how do these battles last more than 1,000 turns? Wouldn't everyone run out of power points? Well, you see, there's one last method of healing that genuinely breaks this game. A core component of Pokemon strategy is to switch Pokemon in and out. Unfortunately, this is an action that doesn't necessarily advance the progression of the game. What do I mean? While Pokemon has a hard limit on the number of moves that can be done due to the PowerPoint system, there's actually no limit to how many times you could switch a Pokemon in and out. Now, in a way, every game has a theoretically unlimited move. What if both teams just keep passing the ball with each other without landing any goals? What if you and your opponent take turns in chess just to move your knights back and forth? Is a game ruined just because there's a way to never end the game? Not usually, because doing so too many times should punish the staller by giving more opportunities for the opponent to gain the upper hand. But the problem with Pokemon's Regenerator ability is that it encourages Pokemon to be switched out repeatedly, because every time they are switched out, they gain a third of their max health back. And switching out doesn't cost any power points. Funnily, Heal Block doesn't even stop Regenerator from activating, and a badly poisoned condition resets the amount of damage it deals per turn when the Pokemon is switched out. This is why despite having less defense, Pokemon like Slowbro can last so much longer as they just need to enter and leave the battlefield to keep on surviving. Now, Pokemon has tried to tame this over the years as well, most notably with entry hazards, which hurt or debuff the Pokemon every time they are switched in. Unfortunately, as widely as entry hazards are available, there are quite a few moves that also remove entry hazards. With the use of taunts and encores, players can exhaust the power points of any hazard setting moves, and then make regenerators run freely. Where again, the ability doesn't just halt the progression of the game, but it actively reverses progress because the Pokemon is gaining health. If the opponent has enough offense, then they should hurt incoming Pokemon enough to later single out the regenerator. But if it's two stall teams without strong offenses against each other, the game will be very hard to end. When these strats yield better results overall, more players could stall just to win, and end up finding themselves in a stall v stall matchup. Which means, in a developer's point of view, the game needs to find a way to keep these interactions engaging, or to discourage them from happening in the first place. Because even if the matches aren't infinite, all forms of healing mentioned in this video do have the ability to drag the fun out of the game. So what did Pokemon do to keep these in check? Doubles. The official Pokemon video game competitions are held in a doubles format, where each team could have 6 Pokemon but only select 4 to engage in the battle. This allows for fewer switch-ins and punishes strategies that only preserve themselves. Regenerator is still a strong ability, but it's not as harsh as some single teams have to deal with. PowerPoint stalling is very rare in doubles. But even though doubles is the official format, Pokemon continues to make changes to benefit single formats as well. Because after all, most of the casual campaign is played in the singles format. And lastly, any PvP game can force the players to advance by adding a timer, which works, but I personally don't want to overly rely on the battle timer to finish most of the matches. In my point of view, Regenerator's biggest offense wasn't the fact that it healed the Pokemon too much, but rather that the ability encouraged switching a Pokemon out, an action that is strategically important in the game, but unfortunately is unlimited in Pokemon, which leads us to matches that could break the game. So, what will I do? I'm here with my Stemma project with a growing array of creatures which each represent a STEM topic, and I do want these guys to demonstrate their respective topics in a turn-based role-playing game, as I've been coding a project on Godot. Now, I have a lot of work ahead of me, but I wanted to be very wary about how health is regenerated. Last video, I mentioned implementing a tool of action points, aka ATPs, where the amount of ATP should be plenty enough to finish a match, but can run out if the match lasts too long or if you keep on using the same stemma. And there are plans to make ATP regenerate only outside of battle. I currently allow swapping between stemmas at the cost of 5 ATP, where swapping is banned if the stemma doesn't have enough ATP. I might change this in the future, as most other skills will usually start to use health when they run out of ATP. Effect skills like Restore are coded to turn into a Wail once ATP is depleted, where Wail is effectively a ranged physical attack. Now with all the restrictions the lack of ATP has, I did implement a resting button accessible to all stemmas, which would replenish 5 ATP. This button scares me, as this is an unlimited move, like swapping in Pokemon, or a Chestus Knight moving back and forth. Even though running out of ATP should be rare, unless one is stalling, I do wonder if a stemma should be completely doomed if they ever run out of ATP. I mean, our mitochondria's respiration makes ATP anyways, so should I allow ATP to be regenerated? It's another thing I'll have to balance later, because it's not like I have any extra held items at all, and even though I plan to have a few passively healing attributes, I want them to cease healing once ATP is depleted anyways. Now, as long as there's opposing forces, balancing is a numbers game. I am aware that balancing requires a lot of playtesting, and while I'm not quite ready to share a prototype, I hope I could have one by the time I finish covering my Zodiac beasts. Speaking of, I have a series of Zodiac beasts, which I drew several years ago, where there's a dozen designs loosely based off of the Zodiac symbols. However, they each still resemble science topics, albeit some niche ones. I don't plan on putting these guys in the base game of Stemma, but I'd love to have them in a separate chapter. But I gotta limit my scope when making a game. So, for now, I'm just showing these designs because I had them lying around for a few years. And today, we're talking about Aquarius. If you are an Aquarius, you will have a nice day today. But what better topic is there to talk about in this video other than non-senescence? Biological immortality. These set of species can regenerate their tissues so well that they don't age, but they're not invulnerable, as being in unfavorable environments can end them. So Hydrarius is based off of one of the Cnidarians with non-senescence, the Cnidarian Hydra. Another common thing about these non-senescent species is just how well DNA is repaired between the cell regenerations, because here's the thing. As cells go under mitosis to make new cells, a little bit of the copied DNA is often nicked off. So chromosomes have regions that we call telomeres on each end, which protect the important parts of the chromosome until the telomeres run too short. But these guys, including lobsters, their telomeres are still intact, which might be linked to how they seemingly don't age. So the anti-aging research is still going on, but in the meantime, here's Hydrarius. Some believe that the tentacle heads don't have brains, as they could be readily replaced and still remember past actions. This is actually the first Zodiac beast I drew as well, but originally they were just a common creature of the roster. As with my other Zodiac beasts, I plan to have a different unique attribute for Hydrarius if it were to be in Stemma, but the videos on this channel just use Pokemon abilities just to use familiar terms. And, as always, check the description for more videos covering not just a Cnidarian Hydra, but also this concept of non-senescence. In games where matches only end until the HP drops to 0, restoring health can lengthen the game, but if kept unchecked, the game can drag out a bit too much. We saw not only the many ways Pokemon offered health restoration, but also how Pokemon tried to nerf them over the years. Oh, also, if you're wondering about absorbing moves, sure, I guess you could heal 25% that way, but it's usually not as reliable because you need to get hit with a certain move, and partners can usually heal you for more. But there are some fun strats with absorbing abilities and moves that target everyone. Otherwise, I mentioned my thoughts on absorbing abilities in my previous video on immunities. So, if you liked what you saw today, follow along and check out my other videos. I got a whole playlist here about my Stemma project. A special thank you to my Patreon supporters for their direct support towards me and my project, but you can support me for free by just liking and sharing this video. Alright, thank you for watching until the end, and I hope, Aquarius or not, you'll recover and find a day to get back up again.